There's a voice that once stopped time itself. In smoky nightclubs across America, when Billie Holiday began to sing, waiters would freeze mid-step, conversations would die mid-sentence, and even the clinking of glasses would cease. The lights would dim until only her face remained visible, illuminated by a single spotlight, a white gardenia tucked into her black hair. And then she would sing a song so powerful, so haunting, that it would change the course of American music forever. But the woman behind that voice lived a life more tragic than any blues song she ever performed. This is the story of Lady Day, a woman who transformed pain into art and paid the ultimate price for daring to sing the truth. She was born Eleanora Fagan on April 7, 1915, in Philadelphia, to two unwed teenagers who had no idea how to care for a child. Her father abandoned the family almost immediately to chase his dreams of becoming a jazz musician, leaving young Eleanora to be raised by relatives in Baltimore while her mother worked on passenger railroads, gone for weeks at a time. By the age of 9, she was skipping school so often that she ended up in juvenile court. The punishment was cruel beyond measure. She was sent to a Catholic reform school where nuns locked her in a room overnight with a dead girl as punishment for misbehavior. For years afterward, she would wake up screaming from nightmares about that night. This was the childhood that would shape the woman who could sing about heartbreak like no one else, because she had known it from her very first breath. By the time she was 11, Eleanora had dropped out of school entirely. She ran errands in a brothel and scrubbed marble steps and floors in neighborhood homes just to survive. But it was in that brothel where she first heard the records that would change her life. Louis Armstrong and Bessie Smith poured out of a phonograph, and something awakened inside her. She was particularly drawn to Armstrong's West End blues, especially the scat section, where his voice dueled with a clarinet. She listened to it over and over, studying every note, every inflection, every breath. She didn't know it yet, but she was teaching herself to sing like an instrument, to bend and shape notes in ways that no one had done before. When she was still a young teenager, she started singing in nightclubs in Harlem. She took the name Billie from an actress she admired, Billie Dove, and Holiday from her father's performing name. She teamed up with a neighbor who played tenor saxophone, and they performed at clubs with names like the Grey Dawn and Pods and Jerry's. She was raw and untrained, but there was something in her voice that made people stop and listen. In 1933, a man named John Hammond came to a club to hear another singer, but instead he heard 17-year-old Billie Holiday. He was transfixed. He later said, "Her singing almost changed my music tastes and my musical life, because she was the first girl singer I'd come across who actually sang like an improvising jazz genius." Hammond arranged for her to make her first recording with Benny Goodman. She was 18 years old. Those early recordings were magic. She began working with pianist Teddy Wilson, and together they created something entirely new. The record company wanted her to sound like other popular singers of the day, but Billie refused. She improvised melodies to fit the emotion of each song, treating her voice like a jazz instrument. Her recording of What a Little Moonlight Can Do became her claim to fame, a jazz standard that singers would try to imitate for decades. But no one could quite capture what she did. She had a way of being behind the beat, of stretching time itself, that made every word feel like a confession whispered directly into your ear. She found a kindred spirit in saxophonist Lester Young, who became one of her closest friends. They had a musical telepathy that was almost supernatural. Young once said, "I think you can hear that on some of the old records. Sometime I'd sit down and listen to them myself, and it sound like two of the same voices, or the same mind, or something like that." He gave her the nickname Lady Day, and she called him Prez. They understood each other's pain, each other's genius, in a way that few people ever experience. But being a black woman with genius and independence in 1930s, America came with a price. She toured briefly with Count Basie's band, but the traveling conditions were brutal, and she clashed with management over her refusal to sing songs she didn't like or change her style. Then Artie Shaw hired her, making her one of the first black women to work full-time with a white orchestra. It was groundbreaking, but it was also hell. When they toured the segregated South, she wasn't allowed to sit on the bandstand with the other vocalists. She had to use service elevators and enter through kitchen doors. Audience members would heckle her with racial slurs. In Louisville, a man called her a vile name and demanded she sing another song. She lost her temper and had to be escorted off stage. The humiliation was constant, relentless, designed to break her spirit. Then came the song that would define her legacy and seal her fate. In 1939, a Jewish schoolteacher named Abel Meeropol wrote a poem about lynching under the pseudonym Lewis Allen. He set it to music and performed it at teachers' union meetings. Eventually, it reached Barney Josephson, who owned an integrated nightclub in Greenwich Village called Cafe Society. He introduced it to Billie. She was terrified to perform it. The imagery reminded her of her father's death. He had been denied medical treatment for a lung disorder because of racial prejudice. But she knew the song was important. She knew it needed to be heard. The performance of Strange Fruit at Cafe Society became legendary. When it was time for the song, waiters would silence the crowd. The lights would dim until only a small spotlight illuminated her face. During the long introduction, all movement had to cease. She would sing about southern trees bearing strange fruit, about blood on the leaves and blood at the root, about black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. On the final note, all the lights would go out, and when they came back on, Billie Holiday was gone. People would sit in stunned silence, some weeping, some angry, all of them changed. Her record label, Columbia, refused to record it, calling the subject matter too sensitive, so she recorded it for Commodore Records instead. Despite getting no airplay because of its controversial content, it sold 1 million copies. It became her biggest selling record and one of the most important protest songs in American history. But success brought new demons. By the early 1940s, she had started using heroin. Her first husband, Jimmy Monroe, was involved, and then her lover, Joe Guy, became her dealer. The drug abuse spiraled as she tried to numb the pain of constant racism, failed relationships, and the weight of her own talent. In 1947, at the height of her commercial success, making $250,000 a year, she was arrested for narcotics possession. She stood in court and heard the case announced as the United States of America versus Billie Holiday. She later said, "And that's just the way it felt." Her own lawyer didn't show up to defend her. She was sentenced to Alderson Federal Prison Camp in West Virginia. When she was released, she had lost her New York City cabaret card, which meant she couldn't perform anywhere that sold alcohol. For a jazz singer, this was a death sentence to her career. Some historians believe the federal government, particularly the Federal Bureau of Narcotics under Harry Anslinger, had been targeting her specifically because of Strange Fruit. They wanted to silence her, to make an example of her, to punish her for daring to sing about racial violence. Whether or not there was an organized campaign, the harassment was real. Even as she lay dying in a hospital bed years later, federal agents would handcuff her to the bed and place her under arrest for narcotics possession. Despite losing her cabaret card, she fought back. Just weeks after her release from prison, she performed a sold-out concert at Carnegie Hall. 2,700 tickets were sold in advance, a record for the venue at the time. She hadn't had a hit record in years, but people came anyway. They came to hear that voice, to witness that presence, to be in the room with Lady Day. She sang 32 songs that night, including Strange Fruit. Someone sent her a box of gardenias, her trademark flower. She fastened them to the side of her head without looking, not realizing there was a hat pin in them. She didn't feel anything until blood started running down into her eyes and ears. After the third curtain call, she passed out, but she had proven she couldn't be destroyed. The 1950s were a slow decline. Her voice, ravaged by drugs and alcohol, began to change. Some critics said she had lost her power, but others heard something even more profound. A voice that had lived through everything and survived. She recorded the album Lady Sings the Blues to accompany her autobiography of the same name. The book, ghostwritten by William Duffy, told her story in her own words, though some details were softened or changed to avoid lawsuits. She toured Europe, where audiences treated her like royalty. She appeared on television, including a memorable performance on The Sound of Jazz with her old friend Lester Young. Both of them were visibly ill. Both would be dead within 2 years, but their musical connection was still there, still magical, still heartbreaking to witness. Her final album, Lady in Satin, was recorded in 1958 with a 40-piece orchestra. The conductor, Ray Ellis, later said that the most emotional moment was watching her listen to the playback of I'm a Fool to Want You. There were tears in her eyes. He admitted he was initially unhappy with her performance, listening with a musician's critical ear instead of an emotional one. But when he heard the final mix weeks later, he realized how great it truly was. Her voice was fragile, worn, but it carried a weight of lived experience that no technically perfect singer could ever match. By early 1959, she was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver. She had initially stopped drinking on doctor's orders, but she relapsed. By May, she had lost 20 pounds. Her friends and manager tried desperately to get her to go to the hospital, but she refused. Finally, on May 31st, she was taken to Metropolitan Hospital in New York for treatment of liver and heart disease. Federal agents came to her hospital room and placed her under house arrest, handcuffing her to the bed for narcotics possession. On July 15th, she received last rites. 2 days later, on July 17th, 1959, at 3:10 in the morning, Billie Holiday died at the age of 44. The cause was pulmonary edema and heart failure caused by cirrhosis. She died in the same bed where she had been arrested, with a police guard that had only been removed by court order a few hours before her death. Frank Sinatra, who was influenced by her as a young man, said in 1958, "With few exceptions, every major pop singer in the U.S. during her generation has been touched in some way by her genius. It is Billie Holiday who was and still remains the greatest single musical influence on me. Lady Day is unquestionably the most important influence on American popular singing in the last 20 years. She had changed music forever, teaching singers that technique was less important than truth, that perfection was less powerful than authenticity, that the cracks in a voice could be more beautiful than flawless notes. Billie Holiday's life was a tragedy, but her art was a triumph. She took every ounce of pain, every moment of humiliation, every instance of heartbreak, and she transformed it into something transcendent. She sang like she was telling you a secret, like she was sharing her soul, like she was bearing witness to all the suffering in the world and refusing to look away. She made people uncomfortable because she told the truth. She sang about racism when it was dangerous to do so. She sang about love and loss and loneliness in ways that made people feel less alone. She lived fast and died young, but she left behind a body of work that will never die. Today, statues of Billie Holiday stand in Baltimore, and plans are underway for more. Her recordings are studied in universities. Her influence can be heard in every jazz singer, every soul singer, every artist who chooses emotion over technical perfection. When you hear someone bend a note in a way that breaks your heart, when you hear someone sing behind the beat in a way that makes time stand still, when you hear someone pour their entire life into a single phrase, you're hearing the legacy of Lady Day. She proved that art doesn't come from privilege or training or perfect circumstances. It comes from truth. It comes from courage. It comes from refusing to be silenced, no matter how hard the world tries to break you. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and be kind to each other.